Hello there, my name is Mason Stoops. I'm here today with EarthQuaker devices to check out the Swiss Things, an all-new device that makes your pedal board and organizing it so much simpler. So let's talk a little bit about the Swiss Thing. Right now I'm coming from my guitar, this funky old baritone that I've turned into, well, a baritone. And I'm going right into the input of the Swiss Thing. From there, I've got this volume expression pedal plugged into the volume expression jack. I've got a tuner plugged into the tuner jack. And let's focus on this A-B stuff for a second, because I think it's pretty cool. Right now, my A is going out of the Swiss Things and into this Tone King Imperial. I've got a little reverb unit on top made by Benson, but it's just kind of dialed in to be a very warm, clean, just American guitar sound. So that's kind of my go-to sound in the studio, something simple, something that will sound good on most everything you record. But sometimes in the studio I like to switch things up and have a different sound that's kind of weird or funky. Maybe you can blend those together, and that can get complicated, but because of the Swiss Thing it can be really simple, because now I just have this whole second output. I've got B, and I could switch over to B, and I'm running now, instead of to this Fender amp, I'm running into this little practice Kalamazoo amp from the early 60s. It's got a 10-inch speaker in there that kind of sounds like garbage, but that's what's cool about it. So very contrasting sounds. I can show you them right now, in fact. So let's go back to the Fender style amp, which is this guy here, from output A. Nice, love it, great. However, maybe they want something different. So I click this A-B switch, what do you know? Going into my little practice amp now. Very different. Wonderful, love it. So you might be thinking, Mason, your amp sounds terrible. And it does, but what's so cool that the Swiss Thing allows me to do is combine those two amps into one big sound. All I do is click this both switch, check that out, and now you hear both amps. And you get this kind of combination of the lo-fi from one amp and the hi-fi from the other, and it's now a more complex and interesting guitar sound. Now, where that gets even cooler and where you can have a lot of fun is effects between those two amps. That could be pedals or even just the effects that are built into the amps themselves. So, for example, maybe I'll dial in some reverb over here, make this guy real wet. Let's go back to just that by itself. Wonderful, exactly like we wanted. But then, over here in my Kalamazoo, this little guy, I've got this really great tremolo that built into this amp that I love using. And it sounds like this. Super cool. Now, this is like some of my favorite kinds of sounds you can get, because I'm going to combine that tremolo amp sound with the reverby amp sound. I'm going to click this both switch on the Swiss Thing. Check this out. Hello, we're back. I've got another guitar. Let's talk a little bit about this stereo pedal I've got plugged in between the A and B outputs of the Swiss Thing and my amplifiers. It's a Mr. Black Vintage Ensemble. It's a really, really great sounding stereo chorus pedal. I love using stereo effects in the studio. It can get a little complicated depending on how things are mic'd and how my board is set up. There's too many patch cables and suddenly something's not working. Where's the power supply? Now I can avoid all that simply with the two outputs on the Swiss thing going into the two inputs on the stereo pedal, out of the two outputs of that same stereo pedal into each amp. So it's simple, it's great, and it sounds really cool. If you haven't really dug into stereo stuff, the Swiss thing really opens up an easy way to get into it. So here's what it sounds like with this amp here on my right. Cool. Now let's switch with the A and B switch right over here. Same guitar, different amp. It's going to sound different. So now we can hear them both together. And now let's kick in that stereo chorus pedal we were just talking about because it sounds so good. Hello. The last thing I think we should talk about is effects loops. There's so many different ways that you can utilize effects loops in your rig. If someone uses a lot of pedals, or you want to use a bunch of weird old things that maybe aren't true bypass or mess with your tone, effects loops come in really handy. For example, even just in loop 1 right now, I've got this old oil candle, which I love using. I love recording with it, but the problem is it's not true bypass. I don't even think it has a foot switch anywhere, so I can't really use it on the fly in the way that I would with a normal guitar pedal. And that's been a challenge in the past as far as incorporating this into my sound. But now, with the Swiss things, I could just plug it into an effects loop whenever I want it. I turn on the effects loop and it sends my guitar in and out of the reverb. And then when I don't, I turn off the effects loop and it's like my guitar signal doesn't even know this is there. It just bypasses it entirely, goes through my normal setup, and it avoids any coloration, any tone loss, any problems that I would otherwise have from having this oil candle plugged in. So whenever I click this button, it will send my guitar into this back out, into the Swiss things, and it's just like any other effects pedal at that point. I can turn it on and off on the fly. Now I have my oil candle ready to go at a moment's notice. Just my guitar by itself. And now I'm going to engage loop 1, which goes to this oil candle. In loop 2 of the Swiss things, I have a Hoof Reaper Octave Fuzz and a Boss PS5 Super Shifter. The reason I've done this is that I love the sound of those two pedals together. An octave up fuzz going into an octave down pedal is really cool. I use it in the studio a lot. The challenge is going to do that live, I have to turn those pedals on and off at the same time. You get in that whole tap dancing issue, no one has a good time. But now, you could just plug that whole chain, whatever your chain of effects is that you love for that one sound, you could just put that whole chain into one effects loop, and at a moment's notice, you just click on the loop button, and there you are, all those pedals on at the same time, and then when you want them off, you click the button again, and they're gone. So it's really, really helpful, it's really beneficial if you're trying to do things where you don't want your tone being colored, or you want to combine a lot of effects at once. That's what effects loops are really great to have around for. Let's listen to what I've got in loop 2. Well, I think we've checked out pretty much everything. That was the EarthQuaker Devices Swiss things. I hope you had a good time, and thank you for watching.